sort of 40-minute crash course on what opportunities are really there for us to capitalize on in smart protein R&D, especially from an Indian perspective. So as Harini said, I am the Sci-tech specialist at GFI India. So together with Padma, we are able to manage all the plant-based, cultivated meat and fermentation related scientific questions. So please bear with me if I'm not able to answer your questions live during the Q&A, because I'll be in the presentation. Please hold off any questions to be answered at the end. But feel free to type in your questions as you go. So just a quick overview on how we are going to spend the next 30-40 minutes. I have sort of split it into 4 sections. The first section will be going over the current state of science for all protein research. So, and by the way, we say all proteins or smart proteins interchangeably. Worldwide it's called alternative proteins, but here in India we refer to them as smart proteins. So in the first section, I will give you what's really the science behind smart proteins and what kind of research opportunities are out there for our Indian ecosystem to capitalize on. The first section will be the longest, and then we'll move on to what are the top Indian institutes in India which are best positioned to take up these smart protein research questions that I would have raised in the first section. And then we'll eventually go into the problem statement itself, and I'll explain how you can sort of gather your thoughts and write a summary report on the most effective solutions. And in the end, like Harini said, we'll have a Q&A. I'll be answering the questions that came in throughout the session, and then we'll have a networking where you'll get to meet like-minded people. So if you're not already familiar, smart proteins or all proteins are classified into 3 subtypes or 3 verticals, they're called, or 3 modalities. So these are all the different ways we'll call these 3 types of smart proteins. So the first type is fermentation-derived proteins. So we all know what fermentation is. It's been used for millennia. And right now we are able to find types of fermentation methodologies from which we can derive value-added products, and it could be edible proteins. And then this cultivated meat, it's really been all over the news over the last 10 days, ever since FDA has finally approved the sale of cultivated meat in the US. So I'm sure you've read a lot about it in the last few days. If not, please go in. It's really fascinating stuff to read that it's really coming true. And finally, it's plant-based proteins. This is quite common. You may have already tried some of these proteins, like plant-based meat analogs, dairy analogs. They're all built using plant materials. They are put together in a way that it can mimic meat or any dairy or egg products. So this is just a very broad overview of each type. I'll eventually go into the specifics of each. So the first section, as I said, is I'll give you an introduction of each type of smart protein and what opportunities are there for us to capitalize on. And yeah, so first, plant-based meat, dairy, and eggs. So here you've all obviously come across at least one such product in India. It's fascinating stuff. The way they make it smell, taste, cook like meat is amazing. And it's all made just from plants. They are composed of the same protein, fat, minerals. It's just like any other food product, but it's put together in such a novel way that it can mimic conventional meat. And it's complete with fiber as well, which meat doesn't have. So usually the plant-based value chain can be split like this. It starts with selecting a source, a new crop, or any available inputs there. You optimize that to have the right amount of protein or the right amount of traits so that you can have the best kind of crop input to make a plant-based food product. And then it goes into processing the ingredients, and this is very important because you need to optimize the ingredients in such a way that it's able to give you an end product which is similar to meat or similar to milk or similar to egg. So there's a lot of protein chemistry involved here. And the last is end product formulation and manufacturing itself. And this is exactly where you're able to get that texture, that smell, and that taste, which can be just like meat. And if you haven't tried any of these products, I would highly recommend you do. So given that this is how the value chain is spread, I would now just pick one part of the value chain, let's say crop development, and let's explore what sort of opportunities are available in crop development and how India and Indian researchers are really optimizing or leveraging these opportunities. So I'm going to go deeper into some of the research opportunities in crop development. So here, if you take crop development, it can have number one, what crop, like what type of plant material do I go for? Like, should the protein come from wheat, soy? This has been done for many, many years. Wheat and soy has dominated the crop protein source. So we can look into diverse. The opportunities here are to look at diverse protein sources, like different types of crops. And then, of course, when you have a crop, you need to breed it specifically so that you're able to get the type of protein functionality that's desired to make meat products or plant-based alternatives. So speaking of crop sources, like I was just saying, wheat, soy has all been there for a long time, and people have now started to diversify into other, crops like sunflower seeds, mung beans, and even chickpea. These have all been sort of dominating the pea proteins have really been dominating the last few, maybe 10 years or so. It's been the new trend. So this is one opportunity to go for a different type of crop source. And in India specifically, what we call it, GFI India calls it the Indigenous Agriculture Initiative. So India has a very, very diverse agro landscape. So we grow so much pulses, legumes, millets. So we as India, as a country, we should capitalize on these types of raw materials for smart protein food products. So there is an opportunity that India is uniquely positioned for. So this is an example of crop diversification. And next is breeding these types of crops. So I said millets, right? Millets are the in thing. It's international year of millets. Everybody's talking about it. But there are some functionalities of these millets that need to be better optimized for plant-based meat or dairy applications. And that could be breeding the crops, breeding the type of variety for more total protein, for better protein composition, for better digestibility, and so on. So there are many, so it's not enough to just have a diverse crop. You also need to tailor it to be better functionally. So these are two examples I just gave you of how there are opportunities out there for crop breeders, conventional breeders, and just a variety of opportunities for us to capitalize on given our unique agro biodiversity. And like I said, millets are the thing right now, and GFI India has worked closely with certain research institutes like IIMR, ICRISAT to really help understand how can we use millets in smart protein products, because no one out there has really actively worked on this before. So this is a very unique perspective that we can take in India. And again, like I said, I'm just talking about the crop development part of the value chain. There are still options out there for ingredient optimization. There are still opportunities in formulation, manufacturing. So There are a multitude of possibilities out there, and I just gave you a sample of how you can have really, really exciting opportunities in crop development. So there is some research reading that you can do about what other opportunities are out there. And I'll get to where you can find these resources. So this is it for the plant-based side of things. Now let me move on to fermentation-derived alternative proteins or smart proteins from fermentation sources. So in fermentation, like we all know what microbial fermentation does. It's you cultivate microorganisms, the single cell bacteria, yeast, fungi, algae. So they're all different types of microorganisms which can be cultivated in a sort of a nutrient-rich broth to make different types of proteins. So either the microorganism itself can be consumed as a protein source, or these microbes secrete a type of protein which we can use for various applications in food. So this is why we look at fermentation derived ingredients as three categories. Traditional fermentation, where we all know how yogurt is made, right? You take a small live culture, add it to milk, and that's a wholesome fermented food. Then there's biomass fermentation, where you grow single cell algae or different types of microbes and consume the microbe itself as a high protein source, single cell protein. And then precision fermentation is like the new rage. Precision fermentation is where you're able to use microorganisms as hosts to produce specific ingredients that you want. And this is not new because we have done this for the last 25 to 30 years. And you may know, if you are familiar with the biotechnology area, insulin is not really taken from animals anymore. We've been making insulin through fermentation, precision fermentation, in the lab for the last 30 years. So this is an example how precision fermentation is a very well established technology where you can make a microbe secrete any type of protein you want by teaching it the right genetic code instructions. So, and this has been used by many, many companies out there in the world to produce molecules that are of interest. Like maybe it's a molecule that tastes like fat. Maybe it's a molecule that looks red and has a bloody flavor like we want in meat. Or maybe it's just something like collagen, which you don't want to kill an animal to get collagen. You can just make collagen from fermented, precision fermentation derived sources. So these are all examples of how precision fermentation can really change the game moving forward. And when you think about opportunities amongst these different types of fermentation, there are plenty. So this is how usually the value chain flows for fermentation derived products. So fermentation derived proteins always starts with you thinking, okay, what protein do I want? What molecule do I want? And next is strain development. What sort of strain, microbial strain, do I want to grow this in? Is it bacteria? Is it microalgae? Is it marine algae, etc.? And then, okay, now I know what protein I want. I know what strain I'm using, but how do I grow it? Where do I grow it? What media do I grow it in? How much oxygen does it need, or does it need carbon dioxide? So these are the different types of questions we'll have as you go to develop a fermentation derived protein. So I know there are a lot of opportunities here, but I am going to pick one, and that is feedstock optimization. So feedstock, like I said, is what do you grow the microbial strain in? Because you need it to be happy. You need the microbe to divide, secrete more protein, and make sure that it's not dying in your feedstock. So optimizing feedstock is a very, very vital process in any fermentation type, whether it's traditional fermentation, biomass, or precision. And then after you optimize your media, you need to make sure it's scalable. And that's where the process design and manufacturing comes in. And then, of course, once you have your protein, you can add it into any product. You can add it into plant-based products. You can add it to cultivated meat and so on. So that's the end product development. But for now, let's just focus on feedstock optimization. What are the opportunities out there and what is it? So the reason feedstock is so important is because this is where most of your money lies, right? Because you're going to feed something continuously to grow cells. This is very important from a cost perspective. So this is a very high impact research area, and India can really capitalize on this, because why I'm saying is we have a lot of agri side streams. So as one of the largest farming communities in the world, we produce a lot of agricultural waste, and agricultural waste is a huge a stream of food for microbes to grow. So India is beautifully positioned to use these agricultural side stream to grow to grow microorganisms in. So that is a perfect way we in India can use this opportunity. Or maybe given that AI and machine learning is really booming right now, maybe we can use our computational biology experts to use predictive tools to understand what sort of feedstock is needed for growing a particular microbe. So that those are more opportunities that keep presenting each day. So these are just a couple of examples of how you can optimize feedstock in India given our local resources. And I'll give you one example of an India-based, a Bangalore-based company which does fermentation-derived protein production. They're called String Bio, and what they do is fascinating. They do something called as gas fermentation. So basically here they are able to grow their microbes just using carbon dioxide and methane. They are the only raw materials they need, and they can produce single cell protein from that. So essentially it's a carbon negative process, because there's no real carbon footprint here anymore, because they're removing these gases from the atmosphere and helping make a super sustainable process to produce food. And they have demonstrated that these single cell proteins are safe for human consumption as well. And these can obviously go into making different smart protein products. And on the side, they're also able to make value added products that's used for agriculture as pesticides or as growth fertilizers. And also have these single cell proteins have applications in cosmetics and non-toxic cosmetics. So this is a wonderful way of you to understand how they managed to optimize feedstock by having a zero waste system, essentially using gas to produce protein products. So something for you to go back and do some homework on what String Bio does and what their system works like. So as I said, what I demonstrated right now is just about feedstock optimization. You still have plenty of opportunities in identifying your target molecules. How do you develop a strain to produce this target molecule? And what are the various ways in which we can scale up these products? And India is very uniquely positioned for this fermentation value chain, because don't forget, we are huge in the biopharma sector. We are responsible for so much of the drug production, vaccine production for across the world. So if you go home and do some homework, this technology is not far from what fermentation is. So if we're able to do that, India automatically qualifies to have the expertise to make smart protein from fermentation. So something to dwell on where India is positioned for the fermentation sector. And now lastly, let's go into the cultivated meat and seafood side of all proteins. So this is relatively new. I think it's been exactly 10 years since Mark Post first showed his demo piece of cultivated meat for consumption in 2013. So it's genuine animal meat. It's not derived from plants or fermentation. It's real meat that you can take a biopsy of these cells from a live animal or a dead animal, grow that in vitro, and grow that in a three-dimensional structure and make real meat. So it's usually a mixture of muscle cells, fibroblasts, adipocytes. So it's that mixture that gives you the real meaty taste. And it has the same nutritional and sensory profile, and people are working towards that, making that more better in some sense. And it's been proven safe for consumption at large scale because FDA conducted rigorous studies over the last 2-3 years, and they finally have made it legal to sell in markets, in market shelves, in supermarket shelves. And by the way, Singapore has been selling cultivated chicken for the last 2 years now. So it's been available for food, for consumption publicly in Singapore for the last 2 years. So if you were ever there, you may have come across it, or if you ever go to Singapore because it's closer than the US, I would highly recommend tasting some. Only if you're vegetarian, of course, because if you are not a meat eater, you may not enjoy it because it's real meat. So as I mentioned, cultivated meat involves a lot of steps. You have to get the cells, grow that in the lab, and then scale it up for mass production. And again, this is a very complicated value chain. So to develop a cultivated meat product, you have 4 or 5 different complex stages to go through. And India does have opportunities to really catapult its research because we have really good cell and molecular biology labs and research scientists across the country. And we need to really focus on this from a tissue engineering angle, because when you think about stem cells, you only end up thinking about human health, regeneration, making new organs. Nobody thinks about cultivated meat. And it's time we really changed that. Like as a country which has the capabilities, we should get into this cultivated meat sector as soon as we can, because that is the future. Tissue engineering can really disrupt the food angle and not just making replacement organs. Anyway, so looking at the value chain for cell line development and growing those cells in a type of culture media, and then once you have enough cells, you have to grow them in a scaffold because cells need to be carried on some sort of a biomaterial, and then you give that 3D structure to it, and finally you scale it up for mass production. So for now, for today's opportunity discussion's sake, I'm just going to focus on the scaffolding side of things. What are the bottlenecks? How do you make structured cultivated meat? So this is a paper by one of our colleagues in GFI Israel. He talks about the different classes of cultivated meat scaffolds. They can be polysaccharides derived from plant materials like decellularized plants. They can come from collagen, which is like fermentation derived proteins. They can also be natural polymers of protein. So all this can give that 3D structure. And this picture here, you can see how they've grown bovine cells, bovine muscle cells on a particular scaffold, on a protein scaffold. And you can see how the difference is with cells and without cells. And there's a fried and a baked option. So you can really see how the texture and the appearance is very similar to real muscle. And this is possible because they're growing muscle cells on a decellularized protein scaffold. And this is what I mean by how important scaffolds are, because you can make it look exactly like whole cut meat, which is what we want eventually in the future. And one more opportunity for scaffolding is to use growth factors. Growth factors are what you need to encourage the cells to grow better. So you can always add these growth factors into the scaffolds and make them communicate better. And then you can have fungal systems. You can have fungal material as scaffolds because they can have the right sort of stiffness and material for the cells to adhere and proliferate. And of course, we should always keep in mind when you're developing these scaffolds, they have to be food safe. They should be able to withstand heat because you're eventually going to cook this meat, and you want scaffolds which are in a way that is edible and at the same time thermoresponsive. So these are some of the opportunities for innovation in India, and I'm saying in India because we have some of the best tissue engineering facilities in the world, and we really need to capitalize on that opportunity right now. And this is an example of a scaffold company in India, MyoWorks. They are based out of Mumbai, and they make edible mushroom mycelial scaffolds. So essentially, it's derived from mycelia, and they've made these in bulk, and they have also tested chicken cells on these scaffolds, and they're apparently growing very happily. And it's animal origin free, so there's no harm done. There's no animal protein contamination, and these are perfectly safe for consumption. So something here to show you, to demonstrate the ability of Indian entrepreneurs. And just to recap, I know we've been through a lot of different types of innovations in the three types of smart proteins. So just to recap, first we saw plant-based smart protein products, and these involve this value chain where we looked at crop development, what are the different types of crops we can use, millets, pulses, legumes, hemp, etc., and how can we process them uniquely, what are the different processing parameters that we in India can really capitalize on. So that is something for you to go and explore eventually. Next, we saw fermentation derived proteins, where we looked into how feedstock is very important for a fermentation process. How do we develop certain strains? What are the different types of process manufacturing design that we can do? And India, being a vaccine manufacturer, being a biopharma giant, we really have most of the expertise needed. And finally, in cultivated meat, we looked only at the scaffolding side, but there are so many innovations happening in the cell line development and culture media aspects as well. So this is a brief recap of what we have gone through so far: plant-based, fermentation, and cultivated meat, and the various opportunities that come with it. And I know I said there are a lot of opportunities out there, go back and read, but this is a very, very, very important resource for you to help with this, help answer this problem statement. So this is a tool developed by GFI. It's called the Alternative Protein Solutions Database. And this is where I was able to get most of these information from. So if you can go on this database on your own time and explore that, you can literally filter out various types of opportunities out there for each different segment. So what are the plant-based opportunities, what are the fermentation-related opportunities, and how can we address these opportunities, and what are the solutions for it? So it's constantly updated. So I highly recommend you spend about half an hour, 40 minutes going through the different problem statements. Maybe plant-based appeals to you more, or maybe cultivated appeals to you more, fermentation. So pick one and go do a deep dive on all the different solutions available out there. And these solutions are the dire ones that really needs attention by research scientists. So please dwell on this database if you're trying to attempt understanding the various opportunities and solutions out there. And given that you have by now narrowed down, am I going to do a plant-based focus or a cultivated focus? If you have narrowed down on that, we can then go on to answer which are the relevant Indian institutes, research universities who can investigate these various problem statements we've talked about, whether it's strain development, whether it's crop optimization, whether it's scaffolding or cell line development. For each of these opportunities, there are a lot of talent in India who can address them. And I will give you an example what India is advantageous for, and what are the play to win scenarios here we really need to make use of. And sector agnostic is regardless of whether we're talking about plant-based, cultivated, or fermentation. In India, we have these three big advantages. And one is we have a highly competent English-speaking workforce which can do anything anywhere in the world. So there's no two questions about that. And of course, we have a lot of local manufacturing capacity. Atmanirbhar Bharat, we have really made a lot of strides there. And our extremely unique point of view here is that we have a very interdisciplinary R&D network. So for example, our IITs are very connected. We have so many CSIR institutes that are able to work with each other. ICAR, Indian Council of Agricultural Research, is another example of these network of interdisciplinary R&D institutes. So these are some of the sector agnostic advantages in India to keep in mind when you are going through the various smart protein research problems. And specifically, if you look at plant-based sector, I've already gone through this. We have huge agri-biodiversity. We have so many new crops that we can explore to make plant-based meat or milk products. For fermentation, as I mentioned, we are pharma giants. We are biotech ecosystem. We have a very strong biofuel, biorefinery ecosystem as well. So our industrial bioprocess engineering is very, very strong. Our expertise there is world class. And finally, in cultivated meat, as I was saying, we really have great cell and molecular biology institutes, and we really need to use their expertise to focus on cultivated meat development. So this is just an overview of what to keep in mind when you're picking your particular area, whether you want plant-based, fermentation, or cultivated. And I could just off the top of my head think of these various institutes in India who have the right kinds of scientists, who have the right kinds of research labs, infrastructure to answer various problem statements. So in plant-based, you have world-class institutes like NIFTM, ICRISAT, IMR, CFTR are extremely popular to answer these questions. And then you have fermentation, some of the best microbial technology places are in the world. And look at NABI or Gujarat, VIT, IITs, they can essentially answer all of these questions. They have plant-based experts, they have fermentation experts, they have cultivated experts. So not many countries can boast this kind of an interdisciplinary environment. So these are some core things to keep in mind when you're writing your response to the problem statement, what you want to do in plant-based fermentation or cultivated, and which institutes are perfectly positioned to answer the most of the questions. And I just came up with this line to really think about how we can position our Indian leaders in various platforms. So as an example, IIT Bombay has effective leaders in plant-based fermentation and cultivated meat areas because they have scientists working in food processing, chemical and bioprocess engineering, cell and molecular biology. So essentially, they can work on all types of smart proteins with enough capital and interest and awareness that there's opportunities like that out there. So eventually, if they really focus their energy into this, they can become a smart protein innovation hub for any type of smart protein research. So this is just an example of how you can think from an India perspective, from a specific institute's perspective. And coming to the problem statement here, you have been asked to analyze the various white space opportunities out there and what is the most attractive opportunity for Indian scenario, for the Indian smart protein sector, what is the play to win. So this is your problem statement, and I've given you an overview of each plant-based, cultivated meat and fermentation. So you can pick, you're free to pick any particular smart protein vertical you want, and you can position that in a way. You can analyze that. You can look at, okay, there is this professor doing this at IIT Madras. Maybe he's right now working on developing a pancreatic stem cell line, but can he use this particular research potential of his to maybe develop a chicken cell line or a bovine cell line or a goat cell line, which can eventually become a cultivated meat product application? So this is how you would think about each different vertical of smart proteins. And when you analyze these various opportunities, you can start organizing your thoughts as a as a short article. We can call it an opinion, we can call it a commentary, we can call it a perspective article. Basically, you would have done so much research into the type of smart protein product you want to make, what is the opportunity area that you want to focus on, and who in India can really get together and address these opportunities. So all this research analysis, all your conclusions can be written as a perspective article. And I can give you an overview of how to really write these articles from a very scientific angle. We just don't want a regular news article types. We want a scientific analysis and a scientific perspective on how India can play to win in certain smart protein segments. So as an example format, you can always start with a brief background. What are smart proteins? What is the type of smart protein you have chosen? Maybe it's fermentation derived protein. And there is this opportunity to develop a novel strain, which can make a novel smart protein product. So that is your solution there. And the unique perspective would be, oh, there is this researcher in Institute of Microbial Technology, and he knows that this particular strain of microalgae can produce this cell line. So there's a direct protein solution there. Please, bring some scientific references there, and then you can conclude by saying if the scientist pursues this microalgae strain and is able to demonstrate the strain can grow at 100,000 liter capacity, then that's your conclusion. You have found an Institute of Microbial Tech professor who is able to take his lab scale research into a large scale application to produce smart protein food products. So this is a way you can sort of narrativize your paper. So it's very important to have that flow when you're writing a scientific article. And of course, please make sure that you're not making things up out of thin air. It's important that you have well-researched ideas. Spend a lot of time on the Alternative Protein Solutions database on the GFI website. This will help you understand what the opportunities are, what the solutions are, with references and not just things that you're making up. And because it's very important in science to have data-backed conclusions. And a plus would be if you're able to make a table or a figure or flowchart, because nobody wants to just see text. Everybody likes some sort of a visual aid. So also try to make a visual aid if possible, and keep your article less than 1,000 words. And I've included a few good articles here that have been either written by GFI folks in the US, or just any article that I thought was a good read. So please go through these. I can share just this particular thing afterwards as a link in the description, so you'll know where to find them better. But please try to read first, research as much as you can before you start putting pen and paper together, because I think reading and research and analysis has to be the major part, and writing will automatically come naturally. So these are some of the tips I can give you for a good article to write. And right now I'm going to open the session for any questions, or I'm sure there have been a lot of questions coming through. So let me go in and answer that. So Ashutosh has a very interesting question here. Can cultivated meat be kosher or halal? Honestly, this has been a big topic of conversation in the last week or so, or actually last year, I would say, because when there is a religious certification needed, how would you do that? And it is possible. GFI globally is trying to put together representatives from religious organizations to sort of set the stipulation of how can we make cultivated meat kosher or halal. And one example here is maybe when you're taking a biopsy from a sacrificed animal, the belief is that you can have a religious representative present there to make it kosher or halal, and then that whatever cultivated meat is produced from those cell lines can be certified as kosher or halal. So this is one thing that, but the regulations are still being worked on. But people from these religious organizations think that it is possible. It's not completely ruled out. And you can do more reading on that. I'm sure there are articles about it out there. So please let me know if that doesn't really answer your question. Has there been any work done? I think Atharva has a question. Has there been any work done on making the carcass of the animal? I'm not sure I understand this question. Why would you make the carcass of the animal via cultivation? Essentially, meat is only the muscle part of the cell. Muscle and bone essentially is what is consumed as meat. So you wouldn't make a carcass. You would, because that would be a waste of energy and resources. Essentially, what is consumed is only the muscle and the fat. So that's what cultivated meat is. You take cells from the muscle, culture only the muscle and on a scaffold, and that's completely edible because it has the muscular fiber texture, etc. So I wouldn't really talk about cultivated meat as making a carcass. It's just making the edible portion of an animal that would be slaughtered. Yeah, and I think that's about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chandana. If there's any other questions, now's your time to ask them. Oh, I think we just got one more question come in, Chandana.
So yeah, Lena here is saying the animal-based dairy industry has greatly developed in India. Yes, that's the milk revolution. And can precision fermentation derived milk proteins replace the entirety of this? So this is something that is often asked, like, can the precision fermentation derived proteins sort of disrupt the dairy industry? Honestly speaking, that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to disrupt anyone's livelihood or any industry per se. We are trying to develop more efficient alternatives which are more sustainably produced without harming the ecology, the animal, or the environment. So essentially, you can make milk protein, like real milk protein from fermentation. And you can essentially sort of combine that with various types of alternative protein sources and make milk, but of course without the lactose component. Because if there is a lactose-free need, that can only be fulfilled through precision fermentation derived proteins. So I don't think we'll disrupt the industry anytime soon, but the way things are headed, I wouldn't be surprised if that does happen in the future. It's like the callback I did to insulin. So there was a time when people thought insulin can only come from pig carcasses or pig pancreas, but 20 years ago, people completely got rid of the pig, and we only make insulin by fermentation, by precision fermentation. And another example is cheese. Up until the 80s and 90s, people thought cheese can only be made by an enzyme that is taken from a calf's stomach. But nobody makes cheese like that anyway. We only make a precision fermentation derived enzyme called chymosin, and that is what makes 90% of the cheese out there. So yeah, I think precision fermentation definitely has the capability to make real dairy proteins, and only time will tell if it completely will replace milk in the industry out there. Jalo is asking, just recently cultivated meat has been launched in the US. Yes, it has recently been approved for sale in the supermarkets. and how their nutritional labeling and ingredients lists are. So there's a bit of homework I can do, I can give you here. So FDA is the regulatory authority who made the statement that cultivated meat, cultivated chicken is safe for consumption and it's safe to be sold in the market. So you can go into the FDA dossier and look through the nutrition. The company has to submit the nutritional requirements, the nutritional labels, the ingredients that they used. Everything has to be submitted to the regulatory authority to get approval. So what you can do is just go Google FDA dossier for Upside Foods cultivated chicken. You'll be able to download. It's a PDF of about 100 pages. And you can just go to the nutrition section, the ingredient section, and you can see what goes into the making that piece of cultivated chicken. And if that is too much for you to read, you can always go and look up in the GFI's Twitter pages. We usually, for people who don't want to read a 100-page report, we do sort of show only the highlights of what is in the report, what is the nutritional labeling looking like, what are the ingredients that went into making cultivated chicken. You can also, that's a shortcut for you to learn the same information without going through a 100-page report. But I would highly recommend reading the 100-page report because it really sets the standard for how we also need to go down that path in the regulatory side of things. Okay, I see that there's some chat going on, but yeah, I think we have managed to answer any questions. So if there's anything else that hasn't popped in your mind yet, but it comes up later, please feel free to email me or Padma or Devika or Harini, and we'd be happy to help you understand this better.
Yeah, for sure. If anyone has any follow-up questions that you weren't able to get cleared in this session, please mail us at ispic@gfi.org. And we can loop in the associated subject matter expert to take your question as well. But now really is the opportunity to get it answered live. So we heavily encourage you to ask any other questions that you might have top of mind. We can give it another 2 minutes, Chandana, and see if anything comes through. In the meantime, right after the session, we will be opening up the Meetaway platforms for networking. I hope all of you have registered. If you haven't, you still have time to do so. We'll just be putting in the link to join onto the chat right now. It'll also show you the option to register when you go into that link. So I'm just putting that link in the chat. All right. I don't see any other questions, so I think we can close now. Thank you so much, both Chandana and Padma, for your time. This has truly been really educational for me as well. So thank you.
Of course. Thanks, Devika. Thank you, everyone, for your very well thought questions. Yeah, I hope I'm really looking forward to seeing how your perspective articles and commentaries turn out to be.